The sweetest wedding. The air in Barnaby's kitchen tasted of sugar and hope. Rainbow cookies, each layer a meticulously crafted hue, sat cooling on every available surface. He'd been at it since dawn, a whirlwind of flour and food coloring, muttering to himself about the precise shade of periwinkle he wanted for the seventh layer. Just so, he murmured, holding a cookie up to the light filtering through the window. Almost perfect. He added a tiny speck more blue to the remaining batter, the bowl stained a vibrant kaleidoscope. Tomorrow was the day, and everything had to be perfect. For Clementine. He pictured her face, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, and a fresh surge of energy coursed through him. He'd make her the happiest bride the valley had ever seen. Outside, the late summer sun beat down on Clementine's honey farm. The bees, fat and lazy with pollen, buzzed around her as she carefully extracted the golden liquid from the combs. The scent of honey was thick and sweet, clinging to her skin and hair. Each drop felt like a blessing, a symbol of the sweet life she was about to embark on. She hummed a little tune as she worked, her thoughts flitting between the practical and the fantastical. Would they need a new rug for the parlor? Should she plant more lavender next spring? And, most importantly, would she be a good wife to Barnaby? A flicker of doubt, quickly suppressed, crossed her mind. Barnaby was impulsive, a whirlwind of creativity and charm. But she loved him, didn't she? Loved his artistic soul, his infectious laughter, the way he looked at her as if she were the most beautiful woman in the world. She brushed the thought away, focusing on the steady rhythm of her work. The honey needed bottling, the labels needed applying, and tonight she needed to prepare herself for the biggest day of her life. The town, meanwhile, was buzzing with wedding fever. Banners of wildflowers adorned the lampposts, and Mrs. Higgins' general store displayed a window full of rainbow-themed trinkets, miniature rainbow cookies slightly less perfect than Barnaby's. Naturally, rainbow-striped ribbons, and even rainbow-colored wool for knitting. Everyone adored Clementine, and Barnaby was an artist. A bit flighty, perhaps, but harmless enough. And besides, everyone loved his cookies. Old man Fitzwilliam, perched on a bench outside the bakery, watched the flurry of activity with a cynical eye. Another buttercup wedding, he muttered to himself, adjusting his spectacles. How long will this one last, I wonder? He remembered Barnaby's previous engagements, the pottery girl, the traveling musician, the shepherdess with a penchant for yodeling. Each time, the town had erupted in similar celebrations, only to be followed by heartbreak and whispered gossip. But Clementine was different, wasn't she? Stronger, more grounded. Perhaps she could tame the wild buttercup spirit. Back in his kitchen, Barnaby was adding the final touches to a towering confection. A rainbow cookie cake, layered with honey buttercream and adorned with edible glitter. It was a masterpiece, a testament to his love for Clementine. He stepped back to admire it, a wide grin on his face. It was perfect, utterly, undeniably perfect. Then, a knock at the door. Barnaby glanced at the clock. Clementine wasn't due for hours. He frowned, wiping flour from his apron. He opened the door to reveal Seraphina Bellwether, the new dressmaker in town. Her emerald eyes glittered in the afternoon sun, and a nervous smile played on her lips. She held a bolt of shimmering silk in her hands, the color of twilight. "Barnaby," she said, her voice a husky whisper. I needed your opinion. I'm making a dress for the mayor's daughter, and I can't decide if this fabric is right. You have such an eye for color." Barnaby's heart skipped a beat. Seraphina was undeniably beautiful, with an exotic air that set her apart from the other women in the valley. And that fabric, it was breathtaking. Come in, he said, stepping aside. "Let's have a look." The door clicked shut behind them, leaving the rainbow cookies, the honey buttercream, and the town's hopeful anticipation hanging in the balance. The air in the kitchen, once thick with sugar and hope, now crackled with something else entirely. A plum in the punch bowl. The organ's triumphant chords reverberated, shaking the foundations of the village hall. Sunlight, fractured by stained glass windows depicting pastoral scenes, painted the air with shimmering rainbows of dust. At the flower-laden altar, Barnaby felt the rainbow cookies sit like stones in his gut. He patted his waistcoat, the embroidered buttercups suddenly a jarring splash of color. Then he saw her. Clementine. Her radiance wasn't a showy spectacle, but a subtle inner light that eclipsed the sun's own brilliance. The ivory lace of her dress flowed around her like a whisper of meadows in bloom, clinging to her form with airy grace. Sunflowers held in her hands seemed to offer silent reassurance. Her father, a steadfast figure of a man, watched her with brimming eyes. Barnaby's throat constricted. He loved Clementine. Didn't he? The thought felt frail, a whimper lost in the growing storm within him. She was nearing the altar, each step poised and elegant. He focused on the sun-kissed strands in her hair, the gentle curve of her cheek, the unwavering trust in her gaze. He had to concentrate. This was it. The culmination of weeks spent furiously baking, blurting out affections, and striving to believe this was right. And then he glimpsed her. Almost hidden by an ivy-draped pillar at the hall's rear, a woman stood, her hair the dark shade of plums ready to burst. Not observing Clementine, not gazing at Barnaby, but simply present, a small smile gracing her lips. Penelope Plum. Their paths had crossed briefly, almost a year ago, at a music festival in a nearby town. Over a shared bottle of cheap wine, they talked for hours, traversing the landscape of the profound and the trivial. He recalled the spark in her eyes by the campfire's glow, her laughter at his clumsy attempts at humor, the distinct feeling she'd seen straight into his core. She lingered in his thoughts, a forbidden, impossible fancy. And now she was here, a rogue note in the otherwise perfect symphony of his life. Clementine was practically within reach. He caught the delicate blend of honey and lavender that always surrounded her, a scent both familiar and comforting. He should be looking at her. He should be smiling. He should be reaching for her waiting hand. But his eyes remained tethered to Penelope. She was no conventional beauty. Her nose possessed a slight sharpness, her chin a determined angle. Yet something about her captivated him, a quiet strength and innate sense of poise. A simple dress, the color of faded denim, swathed her frame, and a silver ring adorned her thumb. She looked like she could belong anywhere, or perhaps nowhere, a true free spirit. Barnaby's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat. His palms grew slick. He felt disoriented, as if the very ground beneath him had shifted. Clementine arrived, her eyes alight with anticipation. Her father squeezed her hand, then ceded his place beside her, leaving her bathed in the golden light of expectation. He should speak. He should grasp her hand. He should express how beautiful she looked, how deeply he cared. But the words lodged in his throat, refusing to be uttered. He opened his mouth, but only silence emerged. His mind was a maelstrom of emotion, devotion, guilt, yearning, regret. Across the distance, Penelope's gaze met his. In her eyes, he saw no accusation, no expectation. Only a serene understanding. A silent acknowledgement of the internal conflict tearing him apart. He turned back to Clementine, to her trusting smile, the unwavering belief reflected in her eyes. And in that instant, the truth crashed upon him. He couldn't do it. He couldn't proceed. He couldn't sentence himself to a life that felt like a gilded cage when his spirit craved the open sky. The organ's music seemed to recede into a muted drone. The faces in the crowd blurred into an indistinguishable mass of hopeful smiles. All he could perceive was Clementine and Penelope, and the impossible choice stretched out before him like a chasm. Words unspoken, vows broken. The Reverend Hawthorne, a man whose voice boomed even when he whispered, cleared his throat. "Barnaby Buttercup," he began, his gaze settling on Barnaby with an almost unsettling intensity. "Do you take Clementine Clover to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" Barnaby swallowed. The scent of lilies, usually a comfort, now felt suffocating. He looked at Clementine. Her face, framed by delicate lace, was a picture of serene happiness. Her eyes, the color of a summer sky, held an unwavering faith in him. He opened his mouth to speak, to utter the words that would seal his fate, the words everyone expected. But the words wouldn't come. He saw Penelope standing at the edge of the crowd, a shadow amongst the brightly dressed guests. Her dark eyes, pools of knowing and, was it pity, pierced him. He saw in them a reflection of his own trapped soul. He looked back at Clementine. He saw not just her beauty, but her quiet strength, the years of unwavering support, the countless acts of kindness, the comfortable predictability she offered. And he knew, with a certainty that slammed into him like a rogue wave, that he couldn't do it. He couldn't chain himself to a life that felt wrong. He took a breath, the air heavy with the weight of unspoken words. He started, his voice cracking. He tried again, louder this time, the sound echoing in the sudden, unnerving silence that had fallen over the meticulously manicured lawn. "I can't." Clementine's smile faltered, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Barnaby," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the chirping of the crickets that had, moments before, seemed to be serenading them. He looked at her, his heart twisting with guilt. "I can't marry you, Clementine," he said, the words raw and brutal. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Aunt Mildred clutched her chest, her face turning a shade of puce that clashed horribly with her floral dress. Barnaby's mother let out a strangled cry. clutching at his father's arm for support. Even the stoic Reverend Hawthorne seemed momentarily stunned, his mouth agape. Barnaby ignored them all. He couldn't take his eyes off Clementine. Her sky-blue eyes, moments before filled with such radiant hope, were now wide with disbelief, slowly filling with tears. What are you saying?" she stammered, her voice trembling. He couldn't lie. Not now. Not to her. I'm in love with someone else." The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. He risked a glance at Penelope. She didn't flinch. Her expression remained unreadable. The silence that followed was deafening. A silence so profound it amplified the frantic beating of Barnaby's own heart, the rustling of leaves in the nearby trees, the distant cry of a seagull. It was a silence that screamed of scandal, of shattered dreams, of irreversible damage. Then a small, choked sob broke the stillness. It was Clementine. Her shoulders began to shake and tears streamed down her face, blurring her makeup, turning her into a caricature of the joyous bride she had been just moments before. The murmurs started then, hushed and horrified. Words like scandalous, unforgivable, and utterly disgraceful floated on the air, stinging Barnaby like invisible wasps. He deserved it. Every single word. He wanted to explain, to justify his actions, to somehow make her understand. But there were no words that could possibly ease the pain he had inflicted. He had broken her heart, publicly and irrevocably. He watched, helpless, as Clementine turned and ran, her white dress billowing behind her like a wounded swan. A basket of tears. The air in the glade grew thick, not with honeysuckle's perfume, but a crushing, soundless dread. Each syllable Barnaby uttered was a shard of glass. Clementine's brittle composure fractured. The rose tint that graced her face only seconds before vanished, leaving her complexion the color of bleached linen. It wasn't merely a rejection of marriage, it was a public evisceration conducted beneath the ancient oak, amidst ribbons and blossoms meticulously arranged. A single tear escaped, etching a clean trail through the powdered perfection of her cheek. Then others followed, an unstoppable cascade of grief, devoid of histrionics, a silent torrent. A weeping wellspring. Barnaby, frozen near the makeshift altar, seemed poised between impulse and paralysis. His features were a battleground, remorse versus what might have been liberation. Clementine refused to witness it. She could not bear the pitying glances, the awkward shuffling of guests now spectators to her humiliation. With deliberate slowness, she pivoted away from the crowd, from the wreckage of her promised day. Her gaze snagged on the small woven basket nestled in her arm. Within, the honey gleamed like liquid sunshine, meant to embody the couple's future sweetness. The irony was a viper's bite. Wordlessly, she began to walk. Not a sprint, not a headlong flight, but a steady, defiant march against the crushing weight of disillusionment. The path snaked through the clearing, past tables groaning with untouched delicacies, past wildflowers now brazen in their cheerful display. She skirted Mrs. Higgins' celebrated dahlias, their scarlet heads bobbing in the breeze like whispering hags. No one intervened. No one uttered a sound. The silence pressed in, broken only by the soft whisper of her skirts and the drone of bees drawn to spilled honey from an overturned jar. At the clearing's edge she paused, a fleeting hesitation, and glanced back. Barnaby remained a lonely effigy amid the festive debris. He appeared smaller, somehow diminished. His expression was unreadable, but comprehension was unnecessary. She already knew. Then she turned and vanished into the whispering woods, the honey basket clutched tight, a weighty symbol of a life derailed. The forest enveloped her, leaving only the ghost of her quiet anguish and the lingering scent of dreams turned to ash. Freedom's song. The champagne flutes lay scattered on the manicured lawn like fallen soldiers after a brutal battle. The scent of roses, once celebratory, now hung heavy with the stench of humiliation. Barnaby stood alone, the silk of his undone tie a noose around his neck. He spotted Penelope plumb near the edge of the garden, her vibrant scarf a splash of color amidst the gray aftermath. He lurched towards her, propelled by a desperate hope that quickly soured into dread. "Penelope," he croaked, his voice rough as gravel. I had to. I couldn't go through with it. You understand, don't you?" Penelope turned, her expression a mixture of pity and something else he couldn't quite decipher. Certainly not the reciprocation he so desperately craved. "Barnaby," she said softly, her voice a gentle melody that somehow amplified the discord within him. "I saw. It was quite a performance." He flinched. "It wasn't a performance, Penelope. It was the truth. The awful, inconvenient truth." He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "I realized, standing there, that I couldn't marry Clementine. Not when he trailed off, unable to meet her gaze. Penelope placed a hand on his arm, her touch surprisingly firm. When your heart belonged elsewhere, she finished gently. Barnaby's head snapped up. Yes. Exactly. You understand. Relief washed over him, so potent it almost brought him to his knees. Perhaps, just perhaps, all wasn't lost. She smiled, a sad, knowing smile. I understand the concept, Barnaby. But that doesn't mean I'm the solution. His stomach lurched. What do you mean? Penelope stepped back, breaking their physical connection. The vibrant scarf danced in the breeze, mirroring the restless spirit he suddenly recognized in her. Barnaby, you're mistaking understanding for something more. I appreciate your honesty, however awkwardly delivered. But I'm not looking for a commitment. Not with you, not with anyone. He stared at her, dumbfounded. But I thought, you thought wrong, she interrupted, her voice still kind but firm. I value my freedom, Barnaby. The open road, the unknown horizon. I spent years tending my grandmother's lavender farm. It was beautiful, peaceful, but ultimately confining. I sold it last year, you know? Bought myself a vintage camper van. I plan to see the world one dusty road at a time. She gestured vaguely westward. Morocco is next, I think. Then perhaps South America. Who knows? That's the beauty of it. Her eyes sparkled with an adventurous light that made his carefully curated life feel dull and lifeless. He could only stare, his brain struggling to process the words. He'd thrown away his marriage, humiliated Clementine, and for what? For a woman who didn't want him. The realization crashed over him like a tidal wave. So, you're saying you don't feel the same way? He stammered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Penelope shook her head gently. I admire your courage, Barnaby. Truly. But I'm not the damsel in distress waiting to be rescued from a loveless existence. I'm perfectly happy rescuing myself. She paused, her gaze softening. Perhaps in time you'll find someone who can offer you the stability you crave. But it won't be me. With a final, almost pitying glance, she turned and walked away, her vibrant scarf fluttering behind her like a banner of independence. Barnaby watched her go, the weight of his double rejection crushing him. The freedom she so fiercely embraced suddenly seemed like a vast, empty space, a space he was now utterly alone in. The scent of roses, mingled with the faint aroma of lavender from Penelope's scarf, filled the air, a cruel reminder of the fragrant lives he had just irrevocably shattered. Empty apologies. Gravel grated beneath Barnaby's soles, each crunch a stark percussion against the heavy quiet that had enveloped him since Penelope's devastating rejection. The scent of lilies, once bridal and bright, now hung like a funereal pall. He gripped a drooping nosegay of forget-me-nots, a meager piece offering for the chasm he himself had carved. Clementine's cottage materialized into view, its sunshine-yellow walls now a painful jest at his expense. Chimney smoke spiraled lazily, flaunting a domesticity he had irrevocably destroyed. He stalled at the gate, its wrought iron scrollwork a cold, judging eye. As he pushed it open, the rusted hinges emitted a mournful shriek, mirroring the torment in his soul. The garden, formerly a vibrant tapestry of blooms, appeared subdued. Roses bowed low as if lamenting lost joy. He trudged up the path, his pulse a frantic drumbeat against his ribs. Mrs. Clover opened the door, her face bearing the deep furrows of a grief that belied her years. Her eyes, usually sparkling with warmth, were clouded with unshed tears. No words were needed. The air thrummed with unspoken accusation. Mrs. Clover, Barnaby began, his voice a fractured whisper. I must see Clementine. I have to explain. Her lips compressed into a disapproving slash. Explain? What is there to explain, Barnaby? How you eviscerated her spirit in front of everyone she cherishes. How you transformed her happiest prospect into a tawdry spectacle. He recoiled, each word a stinging slap. I know I erred disastrously, but she needs to understand. Understand your fickleness? Your selfishness? Your craven inability to confront the truth until you stood before God and everyone? Her voice gained volume, her practiced composure fracturing. It wasn't like that, he offered weakly, the untruth leaving a bitter taste. But it was. Then enlighten me, Barnaby, she countered, her gaze unwavering. Tell me precisely what prompted you to inflict such a calculated cruelty upon my daughter. He found himself mute. The words snagged in his throat, strangled by remorse and humiliation. He averted his eyes, unable to meet her sharp, accusing stare. The forget-me-nots trembled precariously in his grasp. She refuses to see you, Mrs. Clover stated, her tone softening infinitesimally though the underlying steel remained. She's heartbroken, Barnaby, beyond anything you can comprehend. Please, just leave. But I implore you, she pleaded, her voice cracking. Let her be. Allow her time to recover. Time to obliterate you from her memory. He knew her words held truth. Every fiber in him screamed to stay, to beg, but he understood he could only inflict further agony. He was a walking plague, and all he touched would fester. He extended the wilted flowers. For her, he croaked, his voice raspy. Mrs. Clover accepted the offering, her fingers fleetingly brushing his. A flicker of something, compassion, perhaps, crossed her features before she turned away abruptly. The door clicked shut, the sound amplified by the sudden, suffocating silence. Barnaby stood motionless for an eternity, the sharp edges of the gravel biting into his shoes. The plume of smoke from the chimney now appeared as a taunting pyre, a symbol of joy perpetually beyond his reach. He turned and retreated, the weight of his deeds pressing down with each step. The town, once familiar and welcoming, now felt alien and hostile, each street a painful monument to his failings. He passed the bakery, the saccharine scent of baking bread churning his stomach. He recalled Clementine's fondness for their cinnamon swirls, a small delight he had now poisoned with his own self-centeredness. He reached the outskirts, the open fields stretching out before him, offering neither solace nor escape. He was utterly alone, adrift in a self-made ocean of despair. Futile apologies choked him, unwanted and irrelevant. He had lost Clementine, lost Penelope, and in doing so had extinguished a part of himself. The future yawned before him, a stark and desolate wasteland, devoid of hope or light. The sour taste of regret. The bell above the bakery door, normally a cheerful herald of sweet anticipation, chimed with a mocking emptiness. Barnaby leaned against the counter, the smooth, cool marble a stark contrast to the burning shame in his gut. Dust motes danced in the weak sunlight filtering through the window, highlighting the rows of untouched cookies. Ginger snaps, chocolate chip, his famous lavender shortbread, all stale and unwanted. He'd always prided himself on the comforting aroma that permeated Buttercup Bakery, a sugary symphony of vanilla, cinnamon, and melting butter. Now, the air hung heavy with the scent of failure, a sickly sweet reminder of his own disastrous choices. A pair of women, their faces etched with disapproval, lingered outside the window, peering in. He ducked lower, pretending to rearrange a display of sugared plums, acutely aware of their whispered conversation. Did you hear? He tried to give Mrs. Clover's cookies for free. As if that would ever work, one of them hissed. Imagine doing that to poor Clementine. At the altar, no less. Barnaby clenched his jaw. He knew the whispers would come, but the palpable disdain felt like a physical blow. He wanted to shout, to explain, to somehow justify his actions. But what justification could there be? He traded a lifetime of comfort for a fleeting, unattainable dream, and in the process, crushed the hearts of two women. The women outside finally moved on, their hushed voices fading down the street. Now, the only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, each tick a metronome counting down his dwindling funds. He shuffled into the back room, a cramped space dominated by a towering oven and stacks of empty flour sacks. Bills were piled high on his desk, their stark white demanding immediate attention. The electricity bill, the gas bill, the rent, each one a testament to his crumbling business. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. He'd poured his heart and soul, not to mention his savings, into Buttercup Bakery. It was more than just a business, it was his legacy, his identity. Now, thanks to his monumental lapse in judgment, it was slipping through his fingers like fine sugar. He picked up a bill, the figure blurring before his eyes. How was he going to pay? He'd already dipped into his emergency fund, a reserve he'd painstakingly built over years of early mornings and late nights. He thought of Clementine, her unwavering support, her quiet belief in his dreams. She'd even offered to help him expand the bakery, suggesting a small cafe area where customers could linger over coffee and pastries. He dismissed the idea, too caught up in his own fantasies to appreciate the practical wisdom of her suggestion. Now that cafe seemed like a distant, unattainable paradise. A floorboard creaked behind him. He turned to see Mrs. Higgins, his elderly assistant, standing in the doorway, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and concern. "Barnaby, dear," she said softly, "are you all right? You haven't touched your lunch." He forced a weak smile. "Just a bit preoccupied, Mrs. Higgins." She didn't look convinced. "The deliveries haven't been going out." Mr. Abernathy called, canceling his order for the garden club. Barnaby sighed. Another blow. Mr. Abernathy's garden club had been a regular customer for years, ordering dozens of cookies for their monthly meetings. "I'll take care of it, Mrs. Higgins," he said, his voice flat. "You go home. It's been a slow day." She hesitated, her gaze lingering on his face. "Are you sure, dear?" "I don't mind staying." "I'm sure," he said, forcing another smile. "Go on. Get some rest." Mrs. Higgins nodded slowly and shuffled away, leaving Barnaby alone with his mounting debts and the sour taste of regret. He was a baker without customers, a business owner without income, a man without a future. And it was all his own doing. A cake untouched. The scent of honey carried with it the phantom promise of forgiveness. Barnaby worked the dough, the methodical rhythm a silent apology etched in flour and yeast. Each addition of softened butter, each golden stream of honey whispered a plea for clemency. Clementine adored his honey cake, and he clung to the memory of her delighted smile, the little sigh of contentment that followed her first bite, his anchor in the storm of his own making. The last 3 days had been a purge, scrubbing away any trace of the wedding that wouldn't be. Gone were the celebratory decorations, the faded blossoms in their vases. Now only flour and honey lingered, a fragile hope baking in the oven. It was a masterpiece, a 3-tiered confection of sunshine-colored sponge, layered with light, whipped cream infused with nectar, glazed to a lustrous sheen. Candied violets, remembered from a passing comment, crowned the creation. A saccharine supplication, certainly a monument built to his own failings, but what else was it? Love felt too grand a term for the ashes left behind by infatuation. Desperation, perhaps? Stark, agonizing hope. Unable to face her, he entrusted the delivery to Thomas, the freckled greengrocer's assistant, promising a generous tip for careful handling and a direct handoff to Clementine. Tell her it's from Barnaby. And that I'm deeply sorry." The words left a bitter taste. Thomas, eyes wide at the sheer size of the cake, nodded gravely and carefully carried his burden out the door. Barnaby watched him go, the weight of his choices pressing down. He imagined Clementine's surprise, the softening of her features as recognition dawned, a spark of understanding in her gaze. A sliver of hope, green and fragile, pushed up through the parched soil of his despair. The afternoon stretched, each minute an eternity. He tried to lose himself in sourdough, but his hands shook, betraying him. Every creak of the floor, every distant rumble of wheels on cobblestones sent a jolt through his system. His eyes darted to the grandfather clock, each tick and nail hammered into his resolve. Dusk arrived, painting the sky in shades of bruised plum and slate, when Thomas reappeared. His youthful face was a blank slate. She sent it back, Mr. Buttercup." Barnaby felt his heart plummet into the depths of his stomach. Returned it? Was there a message? Did she even see it? Thomas shook his head, the silence amplifying Barnaby's dread. She didn't open the door. An older lady, might have been her mum, took the cake. Said Miss Clover wasn't receiving. He indicated the cart. The honey cake sat, untouched and pristine, an unbearable mockery of his efforts. The candied violets seemed to wilt under the fading light, their vibrant hues subdued. Barnaby stared, the honeyed fragrance now thick and cloying. It wasn't just dessert, it was an emblem of his defeat, a solid manifestation of Clementine's final judgment. He had envisioned baking his way back into her affection, sweetening her disposition with humble pie, but he was left only with this, a returned dish, a sharp reminder of the divide he had forged. He ran a flour-dusted hand through his hair, creating a ghostly pallor. He believed a grand gesture, a sugary offering, would win her over. He'd forgotten some wounds were too profound for mere sweetness. The bakery felt colder now, the comforting honey replaced by the frigid air of desolation. He draped a cloth over the cake, obscuring it from sight, but the image remained seared into his consciousness. A cake rejected, a love denied, a future indeterminate. Utterly alone, surrounded by the specters of his past actions, he breathed in the cloying aroma of remorse. The secret ingredient. The rainbow cookies had to be flawless. Barnaby pummeled the dough, a kaleidoscope of pastels swirling under his urgent kneading. Their absence spelled ruin for Buttercup's bakery, a collapse more certain than stale biscotti. Since the setback, those cookies were the only bulwark against closure, the sole reason the bank hadn't changed the locks. Every attempt to recapture that familiar, almost floral tang had ended in disappointment. Acacia, heather, even the peculiar truffle-infused concoction Mrs. Higgins touted, nothing resonated. The results were consistently subpar, flavors fell flat, colors appeared washed out, devoid of vibrancy. His gaze drifted to the nearly depleted jar of Clementine's honey, a meager puddle clinging stubbornly to its base. He'd been guarding it jealously, stretching its use, praying for a viable substitute. Now, confronted with near emptiness, a cold dread gripped him. Scooping with a spoon, he salvaged the last vestiges. Eyes closed, he savored the lingering taste. It was more than mere sweetener. It tasted of sun-drenched blooms, a gentle zephyr on a summer's day. It tasted of clementine. He recoiled, shoving the thought aside. Indulging in memories was a burden he couldn't bear. He needed to concentrate to discover a replacement. A frantic search through the pantry unearthed molasses, maple syrup, even a forgotten bottle of agave nectar acquired on a whim years prior. The molasses experiment yielded something resembling miniature asphalt shingles. Maple syrup produced a cloying, pancake-adjacent flavor. The agave nectar version was overwhelmingly saccharine, leaving an unpleasant film. Each failure landed in the trash, frustration curdling into outright despair. The bell chimed, announcing Mrs. Peterson's arrival, her customary cheerfulness noticeably dimmed. "Barnaby, dear, have you tweaked the rainbow cookie recipe?" He wiped his forehead. "Just refining it, Mrs. Peterson. Aiming for even greater perfection." She hesitated, gingerly picking at a cookie. "They taste different. Not awful, precisely, but muted. They used to have such a distinctive spark." Throughout the day, other patrons echoed this sentiment. "Something's off. Not quite as delightful as before. They're lacking something." Every comment resonated like a death knell to Barnaby's dwindling hope. That evening, after locking up, Barnaby slumped in the dim bakery, surrounded by the wreckage of failed recipes. He stared at the vacant honey jar, a chilling realization creeping into his mind. He had foolishly considered the honey a simple sweetener, a commodity to be easily swapped. But what if it was more? What if Clementine's honey was the linchpin, the secret behind the cookie's singular allure? He had always delegated the honey procurement to her, trusting her implicitly, never probing its origins. He now remembered Clementine's tales of her grandfather, a beekeeper whose hives thrived in the untamed meadows beyond town. He recalled her vivid descriptions of the unique bouquet of wildflowers that imbued the honey, the painstaking process of its collection and refinement. A groan escaped him as he buried his face in his hands. So consumed by replicating the sweetness, he had neglected the essence, the provenance, the very soul. Without Clementine's honey, the rainbow cookies were merely cookies. Unremarkable, pedestrian, easily dismissed. Much like himself. Honey in the next town. The smudged ink on the newspaper blurred under Barnaby's increasingly frantic gaze. He read the article again, each word a fresh sting. Clementine's Clover Honey sweeps regional awards. The accompanying photo showed her, beaming, holding a golden trophy almost as big as her torso. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes sparkled with a joy he hadn't seen in years. He slammed the paper down, the flimsy newsprint crinkling under his fist. Clementine. Flourishing. Without him. The article detailed how, after an unfortunate personal setback, Clementine Clover had relocated to the neighboring town of Honeybrook and dedicated herself to her apiary. Her unique blend of wildflower honey, infused with subtle notes of clover and lavender, had quickly become a local sensation. Bakers raved about its exceptional quality. Ice cream makers swore it was the secret to their creamy perfection. Even the local meadery was singing her praises. Barnaby felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Honeybrook. It was only a 40-minute drive, a world away from the wreckage of his life in Willow Creek. A world Clementine had built for herself, brick by painful brick. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. The Buttercup Bakery was teetering on the edge of collapse. The rainbow cookies, once his signature, were now pale imitations of their former glory. Customers complained, their faces mirroring the disappointment Barnaby felt every time he tasted one. He tried every substitute, every trick he knew, but nothing could replicate that elusive, magical flavor. It was the honey. It had always been the honey. Clementine's honey. He glanced at the nearly empty till. Desperation gnawed at him. He couldn't let Buttercups crumble. It was his legacy, his family's legacy. And maybe, just maybe, it was still salvageable. He pictured Clementine's face in the photograph, the resolute set of her jaw, the glint of determination in her eyes. This wouldn't be easy, but what choice did he have? He grabbed his keys, the metal cold against his clammy palm. He hadn't driven further than the edge of town in months, not since everything fell apart. The thought of facing Clementine again sent a jolt of apprehension through him, but the alternative, watching his bakery wither and die, was unthinkable. He pulled his battered car out of the driveway, the engine coughing and sputtering like a disgruntled old man. The drive to Honeybrook was a blur of green fields and blue skies, a stark contrast to the gray cloud hanging over his life. He rehearsed what he would say, trying to find the right words, the magic formula that would persuade her to help him. Apologies felt inadequate, promises hollow. He imagined her reaction, disdain, anger, perhaps even pity. He deserved it all. But he had to try. He had to convince her that Buttercups, and more importantly, he himself, needed her honey. As he approached Honeybrook, the air grew sweeter, filled with the fragrant perfume of blooming wildflowers. He saw signs advertising Clementine's clover honey and award-winning honey products. A small, neat building with a sign that read Clementine's Honey Haven came into view. It was charming, inviting, and undeniably successful. He parked the car, his hands trembling. He took a deep breath, trying to steel himself. He had a bakery to save, a legacy to protect, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to redeem himself, one jar of honey at a time. He stepped out of the car and walked towards the Honey Haven, the bell above the door jingling merrily as he entered, the sound mocking his trepidation. A farmer's embrace. The air in Honeybrook smelled of sunshine and wildflowers, a stark contrast to the stale, yeasty gloom that had settled over Buttercup Bakery. Barnaby parked his sputtering delivery van on the outskirts of the town square, the faded Buttercup Bakery logo a painful reminder of his impending failure. He smoothed down his rumpled shirt, the gesture feeling utterly futile. He was a ghost haunting a world that had moved on without him. The square buzzed with activity. Farmers hawked their produce, children chased pigeons, and the melodic twang of a banjo drifted from beneath a striped awning. It was a scene of idyllic normalcy, a scene he had shattered for himself. He scanned the crowd, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Then he saw her. Clementine. She stood near a stall overflowing with vibrant sunflowers, her face tilted up in laughter. A group of women surrounded her, their own faces alight with amusement. It was a sound Barnaby hadn't heard from her in what felt like a lifetime, a genuine, unburdened laugh. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed it, how much he'd extinguished it. She wore a simple gingham dress, her hair braided with ribbons that mirrored the colors of the flowers. She looked happy, radiantly, painfully happy, and it twisted something inside him, a knot of guilt and a bitter tang of something else he refused to name. He lingered in the shadows, a voyeur in his own tragedy. He watched her gesture animatedly, her hands, once stained with honey and flour, now adorned with a delicate silver bracelet he didn't recognize. He noticed the way her eyes sparkled, the way she held herself with a newfound confidence. This wasn't the Clementine he knew, the Clementine he had taken for granted. This was a Clementine reborn. Then he saw him. A tall, broad-shouldered man with kind eyes and a gentle smile stood beside Clementine. He wore simple work clothes, stained with earth and smelling faintly of wood smoke. Barnaby watched as Clementine reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind the man's ear, her touch lingering for a moment longer than necessary. The man, this. Frederick Figgle, as Barnaby later learned from overhearing a nearby conversation, offered her a small, intricately carved wooden bee. Clementine gasped, her eyes widening with delight. She held it up to the light, turning it over in her hands. "It's beautiful, Frederick," she breathed, her voice softer than Barnaby had ever heard it. Frederick simply smiled, a blush creeping up his neck. He didn't say anything, but his eyes spoke volumes. They spoke of admiration, of affection, of a quiet, unwavering devotion. Clementine leaned in and placed a soft kiss on Frederick's cheek. The gesture was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but it landed on Barnaby like a physical blow. A sharp pang of jealousy, raw and unexpected, ripped through him. He turned away, his stomach churning. He couldn't watch anymore. He had come here with a plan, a desperate plea to salvage his bakery. But seeing Clementine like this, seeing her thriving, seeing her with him, made his carefully rehearsed words catch in his throat. He realized, with a sickening certainty, that he had lost more than just her honey. He had lost her, and perhaps he deserved to. He retreated to his van, the smell of stale bread suddenly nauseating. The Honeybrook sunshine felt harsh and unforgiving, illuminating the depth of his folly. He started the engine, the sputtering noise a pathetic echo of his shattered dreams. He had come to Honeybrook seeking salvation, but he had found only a reflection of his own destruction. As he drove away, the image of Clementine's smile, directed at another man, burned itself into his memory. From rainbows to soup, the clang of metal, a jarring symphony compared to the gentle whoosh of ovens, offered a welcome distraction. Barnaby, aproned and smeared with grime, wrestled a battered stock pot onto the industrial range. The aroma of day-old produce filled the air, a stark contrast to the sweet perfume of his bakery, now a distant, bittersweet memory. This was St. Jude's, where sustenance, not soufflés, was the daily special, and cast-off vegetables formed the core ingredients. 2 weeks had passed since he'd begun volunteering, seeking solace for an emptiness that no perfectly laminated dough could remedy. Initially, he'd felt utterly out of place, Barnaby Buttercup, the heartbroken baker on the brink of ruin, adrift in a world of weathered hands and lives etched with hardship. His attempts at connection often faltered, his offers of assistance met with guarded suspicion. Overseeing him was Mrs. Rodriguez, a woman whose gaze held the weight of countless untold stories. Her patience was monumental, and her voice, sharp as a honed knife, sliced through the kitchen's clamor. Enough daydreaming, Buttercup, get stirring, she had instructed on his first day, thrusting a paddle into his hands. Now he manned the ladle, filling mismatched bowls for the endless queue. He tried to catch their eyes, to offer a sincere greeting, but most averted their gaze, preoccupied by a hunger that superseded pleasantries. A solemn-eyed boy, barely 6, gripped his mother's worn coat, watching Barnaby with unnerving scrutiny. As Barnaby heaped a generous portion of soup into his bowl, the boy offered a quiet, "Thank you, mister." The unadorned gratitude resonated with a force that eclipsed any of Clementine's tearful recriminations. He managed a wan smile. "You're welcome." Later, scouring potatoes until his knuckles ached, Barnaby overheard Mrs. Rodriguez speaking with Sarah, a college volunteer. "He's got a good heart, poor thing," Mrs. Rodriguez murmured, her voice uncharacteristically gentle. "But he's like a fish yanked from the river." "He seems lost," Sarah replied. "Like he's running from something fierce." Barnaby lowered his head, scrubbing with renewed vigor. They were right, of course. He was fleeing the wreckage of his former life, escaping the humiliation of his failures, haunted by the phantom of Clementine's radiant smile. That evening, as the last of the volunteers finished cleaning, Mrs. Rodriguez stopped him. "Buttercup," she said, leaning against a stack of discarded boxes. "This is decent soup." He shrugged, uneasy with the unexpected praise. "Just vegetables and broth, really." "It's more than that," she insisted, her eyes holding his. "It's sustenance. It's warmth. It's showing someone they're seen, if only for a heartbeat." She paused, then added, "You can't outrun your demons, Buttercup. But maybe, just maybe, you can unearth something worth staying for right here." He surveyed the unpretentious space, the scarred surfaces and mismatched furnishings, the lingering scent of antiseptic and nascent optimism. He recalled Clementine's luminous smile, now gracing another's face. He envisioned the bakery, slowly succumbing to the consequences of his mistakes. He remembered the small boy, his gaze alight with pure gratitude. The battle for Clementine was lost. The fight to save the bakery seemed futile. But perhaps there existed a different, more meaningful fight. A battle for something beyond himself. A song of acceptance. The day's first light dusted the air with flower motes, a soft halo around Barnaby as he coaxed the dough. Forget tiered wedding extravaganzas. These days, his hands shaped humble sourdough, hearty rye, and the sweet, comforting pan dulce Mrs. Rodriguez craved. The rebuilt bakery, smaller yet imbued with authenticity, resonated with a quiet industriousness. Each brick, each revived customer, marked his slow climb back. Some mornings, he still felt the spectral weight of the unused ring box, the mortifying confession echoing in his memory. Penelope. That memory lingered, a stale aftertaste he couldn't quite dispel, though its initial sting had mellowed into a low, simmering melancholy. The shop's bell chimed, wrenching him back to the present. Old Man Hemlock, come for yesterday's baguette, destined for the local birds. Barnaby offered a genuine smile, not the calculated charm of his past. These smiles were earned, not manufactured. The morning flowed by, punctuated by the comforting rituals of baking. A warm, yeasty fragrance filled the air, a promise of nourishment and simple pleasures. No longer chasing culinary perfection, he was providing sustenance, a truth he'd learned at the soup kitchen. Around noon, a delivery truck rattled to a halt. Frederick Figgle, the woodworker, Barnaby recalled him faintly from Clementine's orbit, a gentle, unassuming figure. Frederick unloaded a collection of artfully carved wooden signs, each adorned with a playful, cursive script. Barnaby emerged, wiping flour from his hands. "These are exquisite, Frederick," he remarked, sincerely impressed. "Thank you." Frederick nodded, his gaze kind. "Clementine designed them." She envisioned something less formal. A shy smile touched his lips. Clementine. Even now, her name spoken stung like a sudden burn. He hadn't truly seen her since the day his world had crumbled. He'd heard whispers, though, of a blossoming apiary, of other things. "She has an excellent eye," Barnaby replied, his voice surprisingly even. Frederick secured the last sign. "Indeed. We both do, I think." He hesitated, then added almost casually, "We're happy." Barnaby managed a weaker smile. "I'm pleased to hear it." Frederick clapped him on the shoulder, a brief, oddly reassuring gesture. "Take care, Barnaby." As the afternoon sun dipped, painting the street in long shadows, Barnaby lingered outside, nursing tepid coffee. A forgotten tricycle, its crimson paint peeling, lay abandoned nearby. A little girl, no more than 4, with sun-kissed hair, chased pigeons across the square, her laughter a joyful ripple in the air. Then he noticed them. Clementine. She pushed a stroller, her face alight with happiness, a tender smile gracing her lips. At her side walked Frederick, holding the hand of a small boy, who gazed up at him with curious, innocent eyes. They were a family, complete, whole. For an instant, Barnaby's breath hitched. He fought the urge to flee, to vanish into the bakery's familiar embrace. But he remained frozen, his pulse hammering. Clementine's eyes met his. A flicker of surprise yielded to a soft, almost imperceptible inclination of her head. Frederick followed her gaze, his expression veiled. Barnaby returned the nod, a slow, deliberate movement. He watched them continue their leisurely walk, the little girl skipping ahead, her laughter a delicate melody carried on the breeze. He followed them with his eyes until they turned the corner, until the sound of their mirth dissolved into the urban symphony. Then he inhaled deeply, drawing the air into his lungs, expelling the lingering traces of bitterness and regret. He smiled. A genuine, heartfelt smile. This wasn't the future he had envisioned. No grand patisserie, no elaborate confections, no societal accolades. But it was a life. A quiet, authentic existence grounded in simple pleasures and the reward of honest labor. And Clementine, she deserved joy. She had found it with Frederick, with their children. He had made his choices. Now he must embrace them. And somehow, witnessing Clementine's happiness as she walked away, a profound sense of serenity washed over him. He had lost her, yes. He had lost everything he thought he yearned for. But he had also gained something, acceptance. An acceptance of his missteps, an acceptance of his destiny, and an acceptance of Clementine's contentment. He drained his coffee, its lukewarm taste now surprisingly pleasant. He rose, dusted off his apron, and re-entered the bakery, the comforting aroma of yeast and flour enveloping him like a warm embrace. He had bread to bake, signs to install, and a life to embrace. And for the first time in a long while, Barnaby Buttercup felt at peace.